Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you today. Thanks for being here for this new segment of Pathways to Discipleship, our summer Sunday school program. I'm thrilled to be here, to be kicking it off, and grateful to be joined by Jane and Anne, and we'll get into their stories in just a minute, but I just want to thank y'all so much for being here. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're about for the rest of the summer. Adult education has put together a really great series. Some of you may have been here for the weeks leading up to this, where there was a discussion around the stained glass windows, and I think that was a very robust and very good conversation and education series. Now we're moving into looking at how we as individuals and as a community live out our call to follow Jesus through different parts of our lives, through different ways in which our lives are impacted by what happens to us and what goes on around us. And so we're going to hear from church members for the rest of the summer, talking a little bit about the life of faith and how it is experienced through the different things that we experience and that we go through. This morning we are talking about grief, and I want to start by thanking you for showing up to talk about grief, because it's a challenging topic. It is one that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but that all of us experience. And if we haven't experienced it yet, we are going to. Because grief is our natural response to loss. And so often people think about grief and they think obviously about the loss of a loved one, and that is profound grief. Grief also exists in our life around other kinds of losses. Loss of capacity, loss of relationship, loss of dreams, loss of employment, all sorts of loss. Grief can pull that up. And we tend to be worried about or afraid of talking about grief with other people because our culture is very uncertain about and afraid of grief, even though it happens to all of us. I happen to believe, and if you've been around me for a minute, you know, I happen to believe in the importance of talking about grief and the value of it and the strength it takes to talk about grief. And I am grateful for a faith community where we are not afraid to do that. We are not afraid to talk about it. We are not afraid to acknowledge its very real presence in our lives. And Jane and Anne and I were just talking a little bit about it. And before we get going into it, I'd want to share with you some of the ways we do that in this community. And many of you are aware of these things. But if you're not, hey, come on in. No, join us, please. We have a number of programs to support folks in this community who are grieving. This is a great example of how we live into it, and the willingness of our adult education committee to take on the topic of grief grows out of the ways in which we talk about grief and experience care for people who are grieving in this community. So some of the examples of care programs that we have for people who are grieving: we have a grief support group that meets monthly on the third Wednesday of the month at 6:30, and all are welcome. It's a conversational, open grief support group for anyone who is going through grief. If you're interested in learning more about it, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. We also have a group for women who desire to become mothers, who are grieving some aspect of the fertility process. That's called Hannah's Heart, and that group meets on the second Wednesday of the month at 6:30. We have an incredible program that Anne may share a little bit about called Surviving Our Spouses, for people whose partner has died. And it is a fellowship group. It is an incredible group of support for people who are living in the journey of widowhood. And they do some extraordinary things, and we're very grateful for them. We have a Stephen Ministry program for people who are going through any sort of challenging time in their life, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well if you're interested in that. And one of the things we do that's kind of a quiet ministry through Stephen Ministry is whenever a person in the church loses a close family member to death, we send what are called grief, we call them grief books. It's a set of 4 booklets that are published by Stephen Ministry, and they are mailed out to a person every 3 or 4 months. And it's just a small reminder that the church remembers them and that the church cares for them. And it's these books just sort of meet people where they are in the first year of grieving the death of a loved one. And they're, I think, very helpful little support resource. So those are some of the things we do as a church. Obviously, the pastors are all available to meet with people who are grieving, and most importantly, we want people to know that we are not afraid to talk about it, and we are here to support one another. And so, I'm so grateful to y'all for being here today as we go through this conversation. Let's open with a word of prayer. Gracious and merciful God, as we gather in this space this morning, we are grateful to you for a community in which our greatest joys and our deepest heartaches can all be held together. We thank you for the ways in which we experience your love and light through our journey of discipleship, and particularly as we journey with this community. So be with us in this time and touch our hearts as we talk about something that can be painful and is also very real to each of us. Bless our time together, and bless each person gathered here. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So I am deeply grateful to Jane Freeman and Anne Gildea for joining me today to share a little bit. And the real meat of this conversation is going to be their stories. They are part of this community of faith, and they are 2 of the people in this community who have walked the journey of grief and who have done that in this space and have a lot to share with us and tell us about how their own experiences of grief have been supported by and also strengthened their own life of discipleship and life of faith. And so I really want to just jump right into it because they're the ones who have a lot to teach us and share with us today. So I'm going to start, if you will just tell, each of you will just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then about the grief that you have experienced, about the people you love who are no longer with us, and just whatever you'd like to share with us about that. So, Jane, would you like to start? Thank you.
I'm happy to. Can you all hear me all right if I don't use the mic? Okay, just signal me if it helps to use the mic. I'm happy to. I'm Jane Freeman. I grew up coming to this church. I've been a member for a long time and have always loved and appreciated everything about this church. My understanding of the church really changed after I lost a child. So my husband's in the audience, Jason. He's in the 4th row, so I will look at him a lot because he walked that journey with me, and I feel like you should be up here with me. We got married in the summer of 2020. Julian Wright married us. It's like all my people are in here, which is really, it's interesting to share all this in this space where I've cried so many tears with all of you. Got married in the summer of 2020, got pregnant really quickly, and he was a boy, and his name was Frank, and we delivered at 38 weeks, and he was stillborn. We had a totally normal pregnancy, and I went into labor naturally, and when I went to the doctor's office, before I went to the hospital, they couldn't find his heartbeat. And so that's where I learned the news, and then we went across the street to the hospital, and we delivered him. I remember my OB telling me, your delivery will be, clinically speaking, the exact same way it would go if your son were alive. And this gets me. He said the only thing that will be different is that the room will be very, very quiet when he's born. And he was right. You know, you always have this moment of thinking when your child's born, you wait for that scream. And I knew the scream wouldn't come, and that was helpful that I didn't know the scream would come. But it still was really quiet. And Jason and I talked about it that night, that it was, absolutely the most sacred moment of our lives, that quiet room. Also the most horrifying and saddest moments of our lives, but also this really sacred moment where there was nobody in that room besides us and God. Um, so Frank was born, and like you do all of the birth things at the exact same time you do all the death things, right? So like we filled out all the paperwork for a birth certificate, and then we filled out all the paperwork for a death certificate, and picked a funeral home in the delivery room. I mean, it's just this very unnatural way to go through that experience. Um, the church was there immediately, right? Like God was there that moment, and then Bob visited our room that night. And this is a story that adds a little bit of light to that night. I had never had an extended hospital stay, so I had no idea what to expect. And a nurse came to the door, and she was like, "There's somebody here to see you." And I was like, "Okay." And she was like, "It's a German minister." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not." I didn't know if like different faith traditions circulated the hospital, and if anybody needed like that faith tradition, they would come in. And I was like, "No, I'm not German." I was like, "I don't need a German minister." And she was like, "No, he's here to see you." And I was like, "No." Like, I've got this box checked at a different Presbyterian church in town. And she was like, "No, he's here to see you." And I see Bob's head poke over her shoulder. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, him. I would really like to see him." And he came in, he was like, "She was saying, your minister is here to see you." And I was like, "But I kept hearing German minister." And I was like, "I can't handle that right now." So anyway, and then it's this cascading effect that you'll talk about too. But he was there. I heard from all the ministers the next day. It was was it a Wednesday that Frank was born? It was the middle of the week, and I remember I was dying to come to church on Sunday. And my parent, we got home the next day, and I was in no state to leave the house. And my parents were like, "No, we are not going with you." They were like, "We'll pull it up online." But I needed to come to church, and I didn't come that first week. But after that, the church was just a part of all of it. I will not answer every question in that long-winded of a fashion, but I love getting to talk about my loved one. So that's the start of my grief story.
Thank you. I will start. I'm old, so I can't start as young as you. I have to start a little later in life. I married my high school sweetheart, and he was a wonderful man. He was, his nickname at work was E.F. Hutton, because when he spoke, everyone listened. He was kind, more than the word that I would use to describe him more than anything was kind. He was funny, had a magnetic personality, but was very, very kind, and was the type of person that would not look through you, but would see you and talk to everyone. So we had a wonderful marriage, and everything seemed lovely. I'll go back to the other things, but let's fast forward to the later part of our lives. We moved to Charlotte to be near our adult children and our first grandchild. Actually, it was the first grandchild followed by the adult children, but don't tell them that. And
They know.
they do, yes, that's true. Within less than a year into our move here, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And we knew there was no cure, but we hoped that he would live for at least another decade. We were very, very hopeful that with treatment he could live, but he died at the age, he was diagnosed at 58 and died at the age of 59. So we were new to Charlotte, we were new to Covenant, we were lifelong Catholics who had decided to join the Presbyterian Church. And during the time that we were members here, he was sick, so we really hadn't gotten involved or really gotten to know anybody to speak of. And when he died, the church still, I was a single person, very new to church, and yet I was on somebody's radar. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. because I'd like to introduce Molly. Molly was our third child. Molly was born prematurely. She was 2 pounds, was in the NICU. Her brother was in better shape, so he was not in the NICU. Very quickly after her birth, we got a series of diagnoses. It started with cytomegalovirus in utero, which caused microcephaly, cerebral palsy with spastic quadriplegia, cortical blindness, possible hearing loss, and a severe seizure disorder. So that is the clinical assessment. The family assessment was that Molly was a beautiful little girl with curly red hair, a slightly crooked smile, and a contagious laugh. She was a very important part of our family. She loved attention, and she got tons of it. We held her for hours at a time. Her brother and sister brought their friends in to see her. The little girl who lived behind us escaped from her home and came to visit her all the time. Molly died shortly before her 6th birthday. At her death, we knew that she was frail. We knew that she wasn't going to live a long life. We mourned Molly twice. We mourned Molly when she was diagnosed because we knew she would never run and play with her siblings. And we knew she would never walk or talk or sit unsupported. We knew all of those things, so we mourned Molly, the person we had expected. And then when she died, we mourned the person that we had grown to love. So, you mentioned earlier, grief comes in many forms, and we experience that in different ways with Molly. I'll go back to, I don't want to go on too long, because I could talk later. I'll just say one more thing. I want to weave the church in just a little bit. When Larry died, when Molly died, we grieved as a family, and we had each other. When Larry died, I was new to Charlotte. I had my family, but they were also grieving horrifically as well, my children. So I really felt alone and afraid I would never be happy again. And I was a member of Covenant, but barely, and yet I was on Covenant's radar. I won't go into all the people that visited and talked to me and all that kind of thing, because the most important thing, and JD knows this because he was with me, I was invited to go on a mission trip. It was a joint Covenant Habitat mission trip, and I went to El Salvador, and I was able to feel God's presence in a way I'd never felt in my life. I was able to let go of my grief in a way that I wasn't able to do in Charlotte for whatever reason. And these people that were almost strangers to me when I went on the mission trip became some of my closest friends, people that I love, and made a huge difference for me. So that's all I'll say right now.
Thank you.
Because I know we have more questions.
That's a great segue into the next question, but I just want to thank you both for introducing us to Frank and to Molly and Larry. I was saying to Jane, and I share this with a lot of people, I think one of the profound things about grief that people who are not grieving struggle to understand is that many people who are grieving, I would go out on a limb and say most people who are grieving want to talk about their loved one. And I heard it said that that is the only way a grieving person can spend time with their loved one now, is through talking about them, hearing their name, saying their name, sharing things about them, about the experience with them. And so if you leave here with one thing, I think that is the most profound. Don't be afraid to ask or to talk about the loved one who is gone, because that is how the loved one who is here gets to spend time with them now. So Anne, you led into this beautifully, but I'm curious to hear from both of you about how your understanding of God and your experience of faith has been both challenged and strengthened and changed maybe by your experience of grief and loss. So,
remember, I think whether you feel pulled really close to God or really far away from God, I think both of those are really, really normal things to feel when you experience loss. And I felt both. I feel both. I do remember early on trying to just wrap my head around what had happened and saying to my dad, who's here, a member here, Blaine Sanders, who's like really good at this faith stuff, I was like, I just feel like there's a broken promise somewhere in here. Like I was supposed to know this child and I was supposed to raise this child, and it feels like there's a broken promise. And my dad was like, well, where's that coming from? Like, who do you think broke the promise? And I was like, I hope it's not God, because that's not the God I believe in. And my dad just kind of looked at me with this like really, he was like, that's not it. And that just helped me. Like I believed it. And I don't know if it was because my dad told it to me, or I don't know but he was just sturdy in it. He was like, that's not a promise God would break for you. And I just decided to run with that, because you all know if you're grieving, you need something really concrete to hold on to. And and so that was one thing I remember, that it was like it felt like it was going to pull me away, and I got pulled right back in. And then the other thing, and I've read some about this with grief, I immediately had this strange feeling in the hospital of I'm going to be okay. Like even when I realized the child wasn't going to be alive and I didn't know what to think, I was like, I remember Jason, I would say to each other, I was like, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Like, and that I really believe is, I knew God was going to come really, really close to us, and it didn't mean it wasn't going to be really, really hard. Did I answer?
You did, and I really appreciate that, because I think that the complexity of that, of we're going to be okay, but that doesn't mean it isn't going to be unbelievably difficult. People struggle with that, and those two things coexist. You are going to be okay, and it is going to be terrible. And we're real uncomfortable with that coexisting, but thank you for putting words to that. Anne?
I had what I call my cross to bear theory, and I think it came from my Catholic upbringing. When I was a kid, I thought that everybody has one cross to bear, and that you just had to figure out what it was and go with it, and there would never be another one. Obviously, I got to a point in my life where I realized that was not true, and I think I kind of knew all along that God doesn't choose these things to happen to you, but I just kind of, for some reason, went with that for a long time, and I've finally just acknowledged things just happen, and there's nothing you can do about it, but you can make the best of it. You can do what you can to help yourself. You can do what you can to heal. Suzanne Henderson likes to say, look toward the light, or something like that. I'm sure she says it more elegantly than that, but I think you always have to seek something that is going to be healing for you. And I think I blamed God initially, but I let him off the hook eventually.
Thank you. I think that, throughout the ages, there have been religious people who have said, God does these things for a reason, and things happen for a reason, and God gives you, there are all these sayings, God never gives you more than you can handle. My response to that is always, life itself is more than we can handle. It is more than we can do on our own. That's why we need God. We lean on God no matter what happens. But I also, this idea that God gives things and different people get different horrible experiences is really painful, and again, not the God that I understand, not the God that I want to worship. But beautiful things can come out of the pain. That's not why we have the pain, but beautiful things, new experiences, new life can come out of the most devastating pain. And those are two very different things. So thank you both for pointing to that and reminding us of that. Throughout your experience of grief and throughout your life since you've experienced these really painful times, what are some scripture passages or spiritual practices, other elements of faith that provided you comfort or hope or strength?
Want to go first? You want me to go?
I don't mind. Okay, that's all right. I always blame my Catholic upbringing for not really being able to recite scripture, but
Presbyterians can't really either.
and
So.
I think that works for me.
But we blame the Catholics.
Yeah. Anything for me that spoke about God's loving presence was comforting to me. I just needed to know there was a God, especially when Larry died. I needed to know there was an afterlife. I needed to believe in God. I needed to think about that. I needed to bring myself as close as possible to that feeling of God's presence. And going on mission trips, which I kind of caught the bug after the initial one, for some reason, I don't know, do you all feel this way, staff and JD, and those of you, Jacqueline, I'm looking around at people that I know I've traveled with. For some reason, when I'm on a mission trip, I feel God's presence in such a firm, healing way that it is extremely comforting to me. And going to the 9:30 service, that's, I love that. It's a reminder. Short readings, you mentioned books earlier. I love, Patricia, you love this too, Healing After Loss. It's a great initial book because when you're experiencing grief intensely, you just don't want to read a whole book about grief. Who does? But one little uplifting reading every day I liked.
I had a similar thing. There wasn't just like one verse I would keep on me. I felt like every verse spoke to me, and and just early on, I realized that was happening. And I thought, we come to the 8:45 service, and for like a solid few months after, I was like, every minister is preaching to me every day, every Sunday. And I was like, I can't believe I've had such an impact on all four of these ministers. And I say that now, and everybody goes, well, that's, I don't know how I'm saying this right in minister terms, but it's like, that's y'all's duty, right? Is like to spread a message that so many people can identify with. And I say it to other people, like, no, that one was for me. That was about me. And so I would just write on my bulletin, like I would take notes, and I still do it. I take them home and read them, and it just was this reminder of like, not only are like the church is reaching out to me in a really big way right now, and that means God's reaching out to you in a really big way. But one thing, one Sunday I wrote down, the worst thing is never the last thing. And I think about that all the time, and there's a way to zoom way out and think about what that is, and then there's a way to zoom in and think, this is not the worst thing. This is not the last thing, and it is the worst thing. And you can have a lot of worse things happen to you, right? And it's not, but that's one that still sticks with me and resonates really well.
Thank you. The one thing I will say to that is that, yes, you have had that impact on your pastors, and so have you, and so have all of you. One of the real joys of this work is that we learn from y'all. And so everything that you go through and the experiences you have and the ways in which you experience it and fall apart and build yourselves back together teaches us as well. I mean, that's the thing, right? About community, we're all in this together. None of us is experts. We are all on this journey together, and we learn and we grow, and we see some new element in the prism of who God is and how God interacts with us through everything that happens in this community. It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So people always want to know and always want to sort of be able to do the right thing and say the right thing. So let's talk a little bit about the things that are helpful right after a loss and the things that are less helpful. And with the giant caveat that everyone is different, and what feels helpful to one person may not to the other, and vice versa. But from your experience, what were the things that were helpful, and what were some things that you could have done without?
I can start. Something, my situation is not terribly common. So a lot of the things that weren't helpful were just like, it was really hard for me when Frank was compared to a stillbirth, to a miscarriage, because it just, in my head, it felt very different to me, and I needed it to feel different to other people. But that's really nuanced. I think in general, I continued to get letters for a long time, or notes that just said, I haven't forgotten. And that was like, everybody runs to you the first couple weeks. And then to have the people that just like 3 months later, 6 months later would say, I still think about Frank, and I still miss your son, like that still just makes me emotional. So I think kind of that like ongoing, and people text me on his birthday every year, and that's really helpful. The stuff that's not helpful is, it was when people, everybody knows this, like when you bring your own stuff into it, it's like, oh, well, when I lost my da-da-da, it's like, I need that in a little bit when we can bond over this shared experience, but in the moment, I needed it to be about me.
I like, I love it really when people say Larry's name or Molly's name and remember some funny story, and it still happens, after all these years. I love, initially, I loved being remembered. I loved when people just said things like, I'm thinking about you, instead of saying, how are you doing? How do you think I'm doing? So that didn't really help me, but just, I'm thinking about you, checking on you, how's your day going, something like that. I had a hard time, and I don't know if everybody is this way, but I had a really hard time after Larry died. Certain people went on and on and on ad nauseum about how much they missed him. And I'm like, come on, dude. You walked by his office today and you miss him. I get that. I miss him every minute of every day, night and day. I can't take your grief on top of my grief. I can only deal with my grief, my kids' grief, that's all I've got. I wrote some notes to myself. Let me see. I have actually a ton of things that I found helpful and not helpful, and some of them might seem mundane in this setting because we're in a church and who really cares about my social life, but I had no social life. When Larry died, I didn't know anybody here, and I didn't have any single friends, so when people connected me, like, oh, there's a widow I'd like you to meet. Her name is Patricia Jocelyn. Or there's a single person I'd like you to meet. I'm a very social being, so being connected socially was really helpful to me. And I'm sure I have more, but that's enough for now.
Thank you.
Can I add one?
Please.
A lot of people were curious about our story, and I'm a curious being. It's one of my values. I'm curious about Larry's story now. Mm-hmm. But some people would say, and it has to be the right person, but they would say, do you want to tell me what happened?
Yes.
Like, do you want to share what
yes.
happened? And
yes.
like you kind of, with Larry, you had a year, which is a longer time, but also a really short time to go from a very normal life to a very not normal life. And with the right person, it was super therapeutic for me to be able to share what I shared with y'all right when I started, to say, this is where it started and this is where it began to end. Yeah. So I think if you feel the capacity to be able to hear that, and you would have, it's a lot to hear, right? And it's really sad, and I'm sure people had to think about their reactions to mine. Like, I think when people cried, that felt really comforting. But, you got to think about if that's something you can take on. But it did help me when people said, do you want to tell me the story?
Yeah. So the through, oh, go ahead.
Could I add one more
Please.
thing? One of the things that I have felt is that often people don't recognize the difference between a life cut short, as Frank's was, so drastically, and a full life lived. You may have loved your grandmother just as much as I loved my Larry and my Molly. You may have loved her every single bit as much. But if she was 95 and my Molly was 5, let's not just put those let's not say, oh yes, but. We have to acknowledge, Kathy Kendrick likes to say, someone died before their time. And I like that thought, before their time. That adds another layer. It's not about how much you love them. It's just they didn't have the chance.
Yeah, thank you. A big through line I'm hearing in both of your responses is it's about who is the focus. And when the person who is grieving is the focus, then you can ask questions like, do you want to tell me? When I'm the focus, it's, I'm curious and I want to know. And you can tell the difference. We can all tell the difference when someone approaches us with empathy and compassion, and it is about what we are experiencing. And so what you might need in the moment versus what I need. And often when someone speaks to a grieving person, what they need is to feel, the person speaking to the grieving person needs to feel comfort about the other person's grief. And so they then say, well, here's what I experienced when I grieved. Or they use some of the worst phrases which start with things like yes, but, or at least. Anytime we try to minimize someone else's feeling by using those kinds of terms, it's about us and not the person grieving. So I think the most important thing is to approach them and sense and see what they need.
Yep. That's what I was trying to say.
That's what you said.
Me too. It's so much better.
It's what you both said. It's what you both said. So
Can you answer the next question for us?
Oh, I'll ask it. I haven't written down.
yeah, so has grief changed how you understand and companion others who are facing hardship and pain? It's a very similar question to the last one. So when you go through that experience, it naturally changes how you interact with the rest of the world. So what have you seen in your own experience of conversing with or being present to people who are grieving?
Somebody told me early on, they were like, when I lost Frank, I worked for a different nonprofit, and it was a staff of 130 people, and it was very, very racially diverse. And so that was a formative part of my grief journey. And I hope this is okay to say, my black friends understood my grief in a much deeper way than a lot of my white friends. And it was really powerful and meaningful to have that. Like, they knew exactly what to say, and there's a lot of reasons that I've come to understand of why that is. One of them said to me she could tell I was closing up a little bit and wasn't sharing, and because I've not been able to do this. Like, I think you're incredible for being able to talk about your daughter and husband the way you are. Like, this takes a lot of work to be able to do this. She said, when you don't let other people in, you're not letting them use their God-given gifts to take care of you. And it's right. Like, when people are able to take care of somebody who's going through tragedy, that's a God-given gift. Like, that is not a skill you learn or understand how to do unless, I believe, you have that type of spiritual understanding. And I think God places that in all of us, and a lot of people are really good at using it. So I try and think about that now. I'm like, one of my gifts now is that I have had some lived experience that is really hard and that deepens my understanding of other people's lived experiences that can be really hard.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
I really have always been about peer support and connecting people. It's like my super favorite thing to do. When Molly was alive, I started a support group because at the special school, you don't have athletic events and play groups because everybody's in a wheelchair or whatever, and you don't know who's in a wheelchair because they're disabled or whatever. Molly was fed through a gastrostomy tube, and I needed to talk to somebody. I had questions about it. I needed to talk to another parent. How do you do this in your daily life? So I started a support group, and that was really helpful for me and hopefully for others in our town. And then when we moved to North Carolina, I started another one. And she had already died, but I still was interested in connecting people, not just for support, but for sharing information, because there are a lot of things that you need to know if you're in the special world. A lot of things we could help each other with. And now at Covenant, I'm part of Surviving Our Spouses, which is not a support group. It's a friendship group. But it's still, it's informally supporting one another. We do fun things, and through those activities and events, there's often sharing, and I think that's been helpful. I think when you're trying to support someone else in your situation, you don't want it to be maybe as tough, or you maybe don't want them to be as lonely as you felt or whatever. You get more support from supporting other people. There's a really good way to say that, but trying to support others is kind of selfish because it's healing for you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, like it's a part of my healing. Like this is a part of my healing. And like every time I get to write a letter to a mom who somebody's told me about that went through a stillbirth, that's part of my healing.
It goes back to that idea that terrible things happen not for the reason of making you more compassionate, but that compassion, that understanding comes out of your experience. And you can choose to live into that or not to. And both of you have chosen to take that piece of it and to live into it and to share something of what you've experienced through the most awful thing to maybe bring comfort to somebody else. And that's, like I said, that's a choice that we all have. And some people go through something awful and never take anything from it to turn outward to other people. But one of the things we're about here in this community of faith is how do we take what we experience in our lives and share with others, because we understand that that's what God asks us to do.
But I think, I said originally, I was on the church's radar. There wasn't SOS, but I was on somebody's radar. And I hope that we can help every person who loses a spouse or suffers a terrible loss. I want them to know they're on someone's radar.
Yeah.
The church's radar.
Yeah.
And we got to get, like, sometimes you have to put yourself on their radar, which is hard. Like, the church only knows about what they know about,
Good point.
right?
Yeah. Good point.
Which it stings to put yourself on the radar, but it's like,
Heard, but have you told?
Yeah.
We have a responsibility.
Yes. And I will just take this moment to say, I always tell people if they email me or text me or call me and say, hey, I just wanted to make sure you knew about this. I'm sorry if you've already heard and this is repetitive. I always say, we would rather hear 20 times than not at all. And so if you're not sure if the church knows about something that's going on in someone's life, please reach out anyway, because we would always rather hear. It is not good when something happens and we don't know about it and we can't reach out.
or your life, like, because it feels really weird to say, I want to be on the healing prayers list.
Yes, it does.
But do people, like,
Yes.
yes, you can,
Yes.
right?
Do
Like,
people ask to put their own name on the healing prayers list? Yes, they do. And that is perfectly normal and perfectly okay and beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for bringing those things up, because I do think that, I will say, the biggest challenge in care for a congregation like Covenant is not providing the care. It is not being there when something terrible happens in someone's life. It is when people don't let us know or don't ask for help. Because we are a congregation full of people who are used to taking care of themselves and handling things and getting things done and solving the problems. And it is really difficult. And as you said, when you cut yourself off from other people's support, you deny them the chance to care for you. And so, as a community of faith, it's important to recognize that sometimes we're going to be the caregivers and sometimes we're going to be the care receivers, and we all need to be willing to be both, as hard as that is. So let's wrap up this part. If you will just share, if you have something you would tell somebody who is at the beginning part of a grief journey, who is just moving into their journey of grief, about faith, about the life of discipleship, about what you have learned or what you think is important about leaning into faith in the most devastating time of life.
I'll start. I think I've said some of this already, but give yourself time and grace. You're dealing with something very intense, and just don't expect yourself to, give it time. Give yourself time. Give yourself grace. Lean into this church. If you haven't been involved, get involved, because you'll find comfort here. For me, I think one of the things was nature. I love the beach, and looking at, like, in the morning, the way the lines on the beach are so symmetrical. Do you know what I mean? Where you just have these wavy lines that are just so symmetrical. I would look at those and I'd think, there has to be a God. Like, I got so much comfort from looking at those wavy, symmetrical lines, because there has to be God. Look at nature. For me, getting out into nature made me feel confident about God, heaven, afterlife, all of that I want.
Thank you.
I think to piggyback on that, find where you feel close to God and go there. And if you don't know where to start, like, there's 2 really beautiful spaces here to just go and see what happens. And I would come here every Sunday and just sob, and I felt so comforted by that. And I think I always knew there were other people crying in there too, and that felt good too. But yeah, I would think go to where you feel God and stay there for a really long time.
Thank you. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to say?
I do have 2 little daughters now. I think that helps a lot of people. Like, part of our story was really, really sad and awful, and it helps me too to know that wasn't the last part of my motherhood journey. So yeah, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and they come here a lot too, and they're loud, and you'll see them. But yeah, they're totally a part of. I was worried that I would forget Frank when I had other kids, and it's like the opposites occurred. So, but yeah.
Thanks.
Molly was a twin, and people used to say, isn't it hard for you to watch him do all this and she can't do any of it? And I would say, no, actually, it's the reverse. I get to watch him do all that, and I see what a miracle it is. I didn't really realize what a miracle it was, until I saw how hard it was for her to do the simplest things. Putting her hands together at midline was like, when she did that, we're like, oh my God, she put her hands together at midline, And we take for granted. I got to see the miracle of child development. So,
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I am so grateful to you for doing this. It is not easy, but it is also beautiful. I appreciate it. So normally in these, we ask people to write their questions down, and there are pieces of paper. I don't know if anyone has written any questions down, I'll just open it up to if anybody has any questions or comments, anything you'd like to share or ask Jane or Ann. Yeah, Walter? Hmm. Thank you, Walter. I'm so glad to hear that. The Stephen Ministry books, they're compact and easy to read because, as anyone who has grieved knows, there are tons of books out there. But when you are really in the process of grieving, it is really difficult to read something heavy or something extensive. And so those books are bite-sized in a sense and intended to meet you where you are in that first year with the process. And one of the things I really love is the second or the third one sort of acknowledges people have kind of moved on and are going about different things. Life moves on, but you are still where you are in your grief. And so thank you. I'm glad that those books have been meaningful to you, Walter. Mm-hmm. Thank you. It is a bit heavy and a bit thick, and different things speak to different people. As we've said, we can't always guarantee that something's going to strike one person the same way it does someone else. Who else has a question or comment? Lou?
That anger became what? Oh,
I just couldn't go there, and I totally understand when people do. I mean, mine was like a little baby, and my emotions were just really soft, like very deep and stuff, but I couldn't look at that baby and be angry. And so, and I, yeah, like the broken promise was the saddest thing for me, but thankfully I never dealt with that. What is the picture though of the iceberg? Have you used that in grief? Where it's like there, you feel the tears and the sad and the heartbreak and that, and then underneath anger is like a huge part of that for so many people. But no, I don't have any good.
I was just, I mentioned my cross to bear theory earlier, and I grew up in an alcoholic household, so I was convinced that, okay, been there, done that, I'm over that, now I'm getting married, this is great, I've already had all that. So then Molly was born and diagnosed, and I was like, oh, God, okay, I guess that was the family I grew up in, and this is my family, so now, okay. I was brokenhearted, grieved, but I thought I can do this. I have this husband I love, I have these other 2 kids, I can do this. But then when Larry was diagnosed at the age of 58, I was really angry. I was furious. Not, I pretty quickly realized it was not God's fault, but I was I just, another thing I say to Kathy Kendrick is, I gave at the office. Do you remember when we had United Way and they'd ask you to give more money and you'd say, but I gave at the office? I would say to Kathy, I gave at the office. I already did this. I did that, then I did that. I don't need this. I don't need this. So I was pretty angry. Getting to the peace part, time, grace, God, just you can't live there. And so I didn't. And I think I always thought that choice is a part of it, that you have to choose happiness. I remember when Molly was alive, my dad came to visit, and he said, how do you do what you do? Because my life was, I can't say that in the church. You know what my life was, right? And I said, I want to be happy, Dad. And if I'm not happy, my family's not going to be happy. So I have to choose to be happy. And I think eventually with Larry, I chose. Hopefully I did, anyway. With a lot of help from my friends.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Did everyone hear that? The process of healing is lifelong, and she asked if there are triggers that bring them back to the uncomfortable place.
Yeah, Frank's birthday is hard for me every year. Early on, like seeing pregnant women was so hard for me. I was really lucky that I got pregnant twice very quickly afterwards because I just wanted to be done with it. Like I didn't even like myself pregnant, but I knew I wanted. I've never said that. I wanted to not be in my body when I was pregnant. So that was always a trigger. And now I have happy triggers. I was saying this with Katherine, like when there's a Frank in the bulletin, or when I read, or when somebody says in conversation, well, frankly speaking, like I never hear what they say next because I'm like, oh, Frank, But certainly, I mean, I can go there really quickly, and I like to go there. Sometimes there's a lot of grief literature. It's like you want to feel, when you start to heal and you start to feel better and you realize you're not crying as soon as you wake up and you're not crying as you fall asleep, you grieve that because you're like, oh, I want to feel, I know I need to get out of this hole and I can't function the rest of my life in this deep, dark well of grief, but it feels really good to be there. Like you need to be there at some points.
Thank you, and thank you for saying what you said about being in your body when you were pregnant, because I think the more we can normalize the hard feelings of grief, the better the process is for everyone around us. And that's a real feeling. That's how you processed your grief, and there's nothing shameful or bad about that. It was where you were. No? Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Jane and Anne, for sharing your stories and for being willing to talk about. And I love that this was your first time meeting each other. And I have a feeling it will not be your last conversation. So as we prepare to close, let me just say a word of prayer. Thank you, God, for this time. Thank you for Jane and for Anne and their stories. Thank you for Frank, for Molly, and for Larry, for what they are still teaching us, and for the ways in which we are still connected through you to the people we have loved in this life who now live eternally with you. We lift to you our gratitude for their lives and our gratitude for your presence with us as we continue to live in this world without them. Be with each of us as we navigate the griefs of our lives, and help us to share your love with those near and far. Continue to watch over us, to bless us and keep us as we go out into this day. In the name and for the sake of Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen. Thank y'all so much.